The hydroponics bay hummed with a frequency that made Elena's teeth ache, but she'd grown to love that particular vibration. It meant safety. It meant solitude. Most importantly, it meant Lyralii wouldn't follow her here. Elena pressed her palm against the biometric scanner, watching the crystalline growth chambers shimmer to life around her. Bioluminescent algae spiraled through transparent tubes, their ethereal blue glow casting dancing shadows across her face. The quantum field generators maintained perfect atmospheric conditions within each sealed environment, allowing Earth vegetables to flourish alongside exotic Etherian grain variants that defied every law of botany she'd studied. "Good morning, my pretties," she whispered to a particularly robust tomato plant whose fruits gleamed like rubies under the artificial sunlight. "At least you don't have ears that twitch every time I walk by." The comment earned her a suspicious look from Dr. James Park, who was calibrating nutrient solution dispensers 3 rows over. His usually immaculate lab coat bore stains from what appeared to be purple Etherian fertilizer, and his graying hair stuck up at odd angles. "Talking to vegetables again, Vasquez? That's the third sign of space madness, right after hoarding coffee rations and developing romantic feelings for the air recycling system." "Very funny." Elena adjusted the light spectrum on a cluster of modified wheat stalks, their grain heads shimmering with an opalescent sheen that would have been impossible on Earth. "Some of us actually enjoy our work instead of spending all day trying to explain human idioms to our alien colleagues." James snorted, nearly dropping his calibration device. "Speaking of which, I spent 2 hours yesterday trying to explain, it's raining cats and dogs to Lyralii." She became genuinely concerned about our atmospheric processors malfunctioning and started calculating the terminal velocity of domesticated animals. Despite herself, Elena smiled. She could picture Lyralii's expression perfectly, those distinctive pointed ears standing straight up in alarm, her luminous amber eyes wide with scientific curiosity and barely contained worry. The Etherians possessed an almost childlike literalism that made even their most sophisticated scientists endearing. "Did you eventually clarify the metaphor?" Elena asked, focusing intently on her readings to avoid meeting James's knowing gaze. "Oh, it gets better. When I finally explained it was just heavy rain, she informed me that Etherian precipitation sometimes includes small crystalline life forms that could technically qualify as raining animals in the strictest taxonomical sense. Then she offered to show me her collection of fossilized rain creatures." Elena's laugh came out as more of a snort. "Rain creatures. Of course they have rain creatures. The woman has 17 different specimens arranged by geological era. She's given them all names." James paused dramatically. "In rhyming couplets. The image of the serious, graceful Lyralii composing poetry for fossilized weather fauna was too much." Elena dissolved into genuine laughter, the kind that made her stomach hurt and her eyes water. For a moment, the constant knot of anxiety in her chest loosened. "You're making that up," she gasped between giggles. "I swear on my grandmother's recipe for authentic kimchi, every word is true." She even asked if humans have naming ceremonies for our meteorological specimens. James's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, she asks about human customs a lot. Especially yours." The laughter died in Elena's throat. She busied herself with adjusting perfectly calibrated instruments, hoping James would take the hint and change subjects. He didn't. "She's been asking where you eat lunch, what shifts you work, whether you have any hobbies she might observe. Yesterday she wanted to know if humans consider it rude to follow someone at a distance to learn about their daily routines." Elena's hands stilled on the control panel. "She said that?" "In those exact words. I told her that yes, humans generally consider stalking to be socially inappropriate, but I don't think the translation matrix properly conveyed the concept." She looked confused and said something about observational cultural exchange protocols. The quantum field generators chose that moment to emit a harmonic resonance that sounded suspiciously like giggling. Elena shot them a dirty look, as if the machinery were somehow complicit in her embarrassment. Maybe she's just dedicated to her liaison duties, Elena said, though the words felt hollow even to her. Dedicated enough to memorize your schedule and ask the computer to track your biometric signatures throughout the station? James raised an eyebrow. Because according to Lieutenant Morrison in security, she's requested access to those records 3 times this week. Elena's mouth went dry. The Meridian 7 research station might house only 200 souls from 2 different species, but it was still large enough to get lost in if you knew the right maintenance shafts and service corridors. She'd spent considerable effort mapping out routes that would minimize her chances of encountering certain pointed-eared individuals. That's thorough of her, Elena managed. Elena. James's voice grew gentle. What's really going on here? Lyralii is brilliant, respectful, and genuinely interested in human culture. Half the crew thinks she's delightful. The other half wants to adopt her as their cosmic little sister. But you act like she's carrying some kind of plague. Elena stared at the bioluminescent algae spiraling through their tubes, their patterns hypnotic and soothing. How could she explain that Lyralii's interest terrified her? That those amber eyes seemed to see straight through every defense she'd carefully constructed? That her graceful movements and musical accent made Elena's pulse race in ways that definitely weren't appropriate for interspecies diplomatic relations? She makes me nervous, Elena said finally, which was true enough. Nervous how? Like, she might accidentally trigger an intergalactic incident nervous, or, she might discover I keep unauthorized snacks in my lab coat nervous. More like. Elena searched for words that wouldn't reveal too much. You know when you're working on a delicate experiment and someone's watching over your shoulder? That kind of nervous. James considered this. Except she's never actually watched you work. You disappear every time she enters a room. Elena had no response to that uncomfortable truth. She turned back to her instruments, hoping James would eventually get bored and return to his own work. Instead, he moved closer, lowering his voice. Look, I know first contact situations are weird. We're all still figuring out how to coexist with another intelligent species. But Lyralii isn't some exotic specimen to be feared. She's just a person who happens to have excellent hearing and unusual ear architecture. I know that, Elena said quickly. Too quickly. Do you? Because from where I stand, it looks like you're treating her like she's radioactive. The accusation stung because it held just enough truth to hurt. Elena had been avoiding Lyralii, but not for the reasons James assumed. The problem wasn't that Lyralii seemed alien. The problem was that she didn't seem alien enough. When the first Etherian delegation arrived 6 months ago, Elena had expected creatures that looked and moved and thought in ways completely foreign to human experience. Instead, she found herself face to face with beings who laughed at unexpected moments, who grew frustrated with malfunctioning equipment, who seemed to genuinely enjoy learning new things. The only visible difference was those elegant, expressive ears that betrayed emotions their faces kept carefully neutral. Lyralii, in particular, possessed a curiosity and intelligence that reminded Elena uncomfortably of herself. Watching the alien woman work was like looking in a funhouse mirror, familiar enough to be recognizable, different enough to be fascinating. And that fascination scared the hell out of her. I should go, Elena said, gathering her data tablets. Shift change in 20 minutes. James caught her arm gently. Elena, whatever's going on, you can't avoid her forever. The station isn't that big, and we're going to be working together for at least another year. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Another year of ducking through maintenance shafts, taking meals at odd hours, volunteering for every solitary assignment available. Another year of catching glimpses of amber eyes and pointed ears in her peripheral vision, of jumping every time someone entered a room behind her. Another year of pretending she didn't dream about those graceful hands and that musical laugh. I'll figure something out, she said, and escaped before James could ask any more uncomfortable questions. The corridor outside hydroponics stretched in both directions, its curved walls lined with softly glowing panels that mimicked natural daylight cycles. Elena chose the longer route back to her quarters, the one that wound through the station's outer ring and required 3 different transport lifts. The scenic route, she told herself. Definitely not the coward's route. She was halfway to the first lift when she heard familiar footsteps behind her. The emergency klaxon started wailing at 0347 hours, jolting Elena from dreams she'd rather not analyze. She rolled out of her bunk, muscle memory guiding her into her emergency suit before her brain fully engaged. The artificial gravity felt wrong, too light in some places, too heavy in others, like the station was hiccuping through space-time. All senior staff to emergency stations, Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the comm system. We have a cascade failure in the quantum field generators. This is not a drill. Elena's blood went cold. The quantum generators didn't just power their agricultural experiments, they kept the station's local spacetime stable. Without them, Meridian 7 would become a very expensive piece of cosmic debris, along with everyone aboard. She sprinted through corridors already filled with running crew members, their faces grim in the red emergency lighting. The main engineering deck was chaos when she arrived, holographic displays flickering with warnings and diagnostic readouts that painted an increasingly dire picture. Status report, she called to Chief Engineer Nakamura, who was elbow-deep in a control console that was sparking ominously. 3 generators offline, 2 more showing critical instabilities, Nakamura replied without looking up. Whatever hit us, it targeted the quantum resonance chamber specifically. Too precise to be random system failure. Sabotage? Elena's stomach clenched. Tensions between the Human Coalition and Etherian Collective had been escalating for weeks, despite the diplomatic niceties maintained on stations like Meridian 7. That's above my pay grade. Right now, I need someone to crawl through the maintenance conduits and manually reroute power through the backup crystalline matrix. The access points are too small for most of us, and the radiation levels. I'll do it. The voice came from behind them, musical and slightly accented. Elena turned to find Lyralii standing in the doorway, already sealed into an Etherian emergency suit that gleamed like liquid silver. Her pointed ears were pressed flat against her head, a sign of extreme stress that Elena had learned to recognize despite herself. Absolutely not, Nakamura said. Those conduits are designed for emergency maintenance by trained personnel only. The radiation exposure alone will be significantly less harmful to Etherian physiology than to humans, Lyralii interrupted, her ears twitching forward with determination. Our cellular structure is more resistant to quantum field disruption. And I am, as you say, trained personnel. I hold degrees in both quantum mechanics and exotic matter manipulation. Elena found herself speaking before she could stop herself. It's too dangerous to go alone. I'll come with you. 3 pairs of eyes turned to stare at her in surprise. Even her own internal voice was asking what the hell she thought she was doing. Elena, Nakamura said carefully, you've been avoiding maintenance duty for months. Are you sure? Someone needs to monitor the human-designed systems while Lyralii works on the Etherian components, Elena said, improvising desperately. The quantum resonators are a hybrid technology. We'll need both perspectives. Lyralii's ears perked up slightly, and Elena caught the faintest hint of what might have been amusement in those amber eyes. Your concern for proper collaborative protocol is noted, Dr. Vasquez. I accept your assistance. 20 minutes later, Elena was regretting every decision that had led to this moment. The maintenance conduits were cramped, barely wide enough for a single person to crawl through, and the quantum field fluctuations made her suit's instruments go haywire every few seconds. Worse, Lyralii was directly ahead of her, close enough that Elena could see the graceful way she moved even in the confined space. According to my readings, the next junction should contain the primary rerouting matrix. Lyralii's voice came through the comm system, slightly distorted by the quantum interference. How are your radiation levels? Elena checked her dosimeter and tried not to grimace. Still within acceptable parameters. Barely. How are you holding up? The radiation is less pleasant than anticipated, but manageable. I confess, I did not expect human emergency protocols to involve quite so much crawling through narrow spaces in uncomfortable positions. Despite their dire situation, Elena snorted with laughter. Wait until you see our fire evacuation procedures. Nothing but undignified scrambling and people bumping into each other like panicked sheep. Sheep. Lyralii paused in her crawling, and Elena nearly collided with her boots. The woolly agricultural animals. They panic in fires. It's a metaphor. Humans tend to lose all sense of coordination during emergencies and just follow whoever seems to know where they're going. Elena realized this probably wasn't the most flattering description of her species. We're actually quite brave individually. It's just, collective decision-making under pressure isn't our strongest skill. Fascinating. Etherians respond to crisis by forming what you might call a hive mind, our emotional states synchronized through electromagnetic resonance, allowing for highly coordinated group responses. Lyralii resumed crawling, her voice thoughtful. Of course, this also means that if one individual panics, the entire group may experience sympathetic terror. Elena tried to imagine an entire room full of Etherians simultaneously losing their minds and failing spectacularly. That sounds problematic. Indeed. Last year, a laboratory accident involving a particularly startling shade of pink resulted in 17 researchers simultaneously fainting. The color apparently resonated at a frequency that triggered our species' instinctive fear response. Pink. Elena couldn't help herself. Your people are afraid of pink. Not all pink. Specifically, the shade that your human artists call hot magenta. It mimics the warning coloration of a predator species from our homeworld. Very large predator. With many teeth. Lyralii's ears were definitely twitching with embarrassment now. It is not our species' most dignified evolutionary adaptation. Elena was laughing so hard she could barely breathe, which was unfortunate since breathing was already challenging in the cramped conduit. The image of sophisticated Etherian scientists collapsing en masse because someone wore the wrong shade of pink was too absurd to process. I'm sorry, she gasped between giggles. I'm not laughing at you. It's just, we all have weird evolutionary quirks. Humans can't see certain optical illusions without getting motion sick, and don't get me started on our response to sudden loud noises. You mean the startle reflex that causes humans to leap approximately 3 feet in any direction while making undignified squeaking sounds? Lyralii's voice carried a note of gentle teasing. I may have observed this phenomenon during my cultural research. Cultural research, huh? Elena's laughter died as she remembered James's earlier comments about Lyralii tracking her movements around the station. Is that what we're calling it? Lyralii went very still ahead of her. Even in the dim emergency lighting, Elena could see her ears flatten against her head again. Yes. Cultural research. I apologize if my methods have been intrusive. Social customs vary significantly between our species, and I feared I might have inadvertently violated human privacy protocols. The genuine distress in Lyralii's voice made Elena's chest tighten with an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much, her radiation detector started screaming. Elena. Lyralii's voice was sharp with alarm. Your exposure levels are spiking. We need to get you out of here immediately. No, we're too close. I can see the junction ahead. Elena forced herself to keep crawling, though her suit's warnings were becoming increasingly frantic. Just a few more meters. Absolutely not. I will not be responsible for your radiation poisoning because you are too stubborn to retreat to safety. Lyralii had somehow managed to turn around in a narrow space and was now facing Elena directly, amber eyes blazing with determination. This is not a cultural difference. This is basic self-preservation. Elena stared into those concerned eyes and felt something dangerous shift inside her chest. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that? Like her safety mattered more than the mission. "The station will be destroyed if we don't fix this," she said weakly. "The station will be fine. I can complete the repairs alone, the remaining components are all Etherian technology. But I cannot complete them knowing that you are dying of radiation exposure 3 meters behind me." Lyraliai's voice dropped to something almost gentle. "Please, Elena. Let me protect you this once." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "Let me protect you." When had anyone ever said that to her? When had she ever wanted them to? Elena's voice caught. The radiation detector was shrieking now, and her vision was starting to blur around the edges. Okay, you're right." Lyraliai's relief was visible even in the cramped, poorly lit conduit. Her ears perked up, and she immediately began the complex process of backing through the maintenance tunnel while Elena followed, both of them moving as quickly as the narrow space allowed. They emerged from the conduits 20 minutes later, Elena's legs shaking from adrenaline and mild radiation sickness. Lyraliai immediately called for a medical team while helping Elena out of her suit, her movements quick and efficient but surprisingly gentle. "Dr. Martinez will want to run decontamination protocols," Lyraliai said, though she didn't let go of Elena's arm. The exposure levels were significant, though not life-threatening with proper treatment. Elena nodded, suddenly too tired to speak. The medical team was approaching with scanners and neutralization compounds, but all she could focus on was the way Lyraliai was looking at her, concerned, protective, almost possessive. "The repairs," Elena managed. "Did you complete, functional, and stable," Lyraliai said with quiet pride. "The quantum generators are operating at 97% efficiency. Meridian 7 is no longer in danger of catastrophic spacetime collapse." "Good." Elena closed her eyes as the medical scanner passed over her, its gentle hum somehow soothing after the chaos of the emergency. That's good." When she opened her eyes again, Lyraliai was still there, still watching her with that intense amber gaze. "Thank you," Elena said softly. "For making me retreat. For completing the mission. For everything." Lyraliai's ears twitched in what Elena was beginning to recognize as pleasure. "It was my honor to work alongside you, Dr. Vasquez. Perhaps we might collaborate again under less emergency circumstances." Elena's heart did something complicated and entirely unhelpful. "Maybe we could." 3 days after the quantum generator crisis, Elena was hiding in the observation deck at 2300 hours, nursing a cup of synthetic coffee that tasted like disappointment and watching the Kepler 442 nebula swirl in patterns that defied human comprehension. The deck was supposed to be empty during night cycle, which made it the perfect place to avoid unexpected encounters with certain alien colleagues who seemed to have developed an alarming talent for appearing wherever Elena happened to be. She'd chosen a corner seat behind one of the massive support pillars, reasoning that even if someone did venture onto the observation deck, they'd have to actively search to find her. It was a solid plan that had worked for the past 2 nights. Which was why she nearly choked on her terrible coffee when Lyraliai's voice came from directly behind her. "Dr. Vasquez. I had hoped I might find you here." Elena spun around, sloshing coffee on her lab coat. Lyraliai stood in the deck's entrance, silhouetted against the corridor lighting like something from a recruitment poster for interspecies cooperation. Her pointed ears were standing at full attention, and her expression held the kind of determined patience usually reserved for parents dealing with particularly stubborn children. "Lyraliai." Elena's voice came out as a squeak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I was just enjoying the view. The nebula formations are particularly active tonight. Yes, the electromagnetic storms are quite spectacular." Lyraliai moved closer, her footsteps silent on the deck's padded flooring. "I have been monitoring them from the sensor array. The quantum resonance patterns are unlike anything in Etherian astronomical records. Elena nodded enthusiastically, seizing on the safe topic of scientific observation. The color variations alone suggest at least 17 different exotic matter compositions. I've been trying to correlate the spectral analysis with Elena. Lyraliai's voice was gentle but firm. We need to talk. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Elena felt her carefully constructed defenses crumbling, leaving her exposed under that steady amber gaze. Outside the massive viewport, binary stars painted the nebula in shades of gold and crimson, their light casting shifting shadows across Lyraliai's face. Talk about what? Elena asked, though they both knew the question was pointless. Lyraliai settled into the seat across from Elena, her movements as graceful as always. About why you have been avoiding me for the past 6 months. About why you take maintenance routes through sections of the station that add 20 minutes to your daily commute. About why you volunteered for solo assignments to the outer sensor arrays 3 times last week. Elena's coffee suddenly tasted even worse than usual. I haven't been avoiding you specifically. I just prefer solitary work environments. It helps me concentrate. Elena. Lyraliai leaned forward, her ears tilting in what Elena had learned was an expression of gentle skepticism. Yesterday, you hid in a supply closet for 47 minutes to avoid crossing paths with me in corridor C7. James Park informed me of this after he discovered you emerging from behind a stack of hydroponics equipment looking, and I quote, like a startled prairie dog. James has a big mouth, Elena muttered. James is concerned about you. As am I. Lyraliai's voice carried that musical quality that made Elena's pulse do complicated things. Your behavior suggests either deep personal discomfort with my presence, or... She paused, her ears twitching uncertainly. Or cultural misunderstanding that I have inadvertently caused. Elena stared into her coffee cup, watching the synthetic liquid swirl in patterns that reminded her uncomfortably of the nebula outside. How could she explain that Lyraliai's presence didn't make her uncomfortable, it made her entirely too comfortable? That every conversation left her wanting more. That she'd started looking forward to glimpses of pointed ears in her peripheral vision, even as she fled in the opposite direction. It's not cultural misunderstanding, she said finally. Then what? Lyraliai's ears perked forward with hope. Have I violated some human social protocol? Made inappropriate requests? My research into human customs has been extensive, but I fear there may be nuances I have missed. Elena nearly smiled despite herself. Your research methods are very thorough. Yes, well. Lyraliai's ears drooped slightly with embarrassment. I may have been overly enthusiastic in my observational techniques. In Etherian culture, watching someone's daily patterns is considered a form of respectful interest. I did not realize it might be perceived as invasive by humans. It's not invasive, Elena said quickly. I mean, it is, but not in a bad way. It's just. She struggled for words that wouldn't reveal too much. Complicated. Complicated how? Lyraliai tilted her head, a gesture that managed to be both alien and endearingly curious. I am quite adept at understanding complex systems. Elena laughed, a sound with too much desperation in it. Not this kind of complex. Trust me. I would like to trust you, Lyraliai said softly. But trust requires communication, and you have been remarkably uncommunicative for someone whose professional reputation emphasizes collaborative research. The observation stung because it was accurate. Elena had built her career on interdisciplinary cooperation, on finding common ground between different scientific perspectives. Yet here she was, running from the most fascinating collaboration opportunity of her life because her emotions had decided to complicate everything. What do you want me to say? Elena asked, frustration bleeding into her voice. The truth would be refreshing. Lyraliai's ears stood straight up, betraying her own growing frustration. I have spent considerable time attempting to understand human social dynamics, but your behavior defies every pattern I have observed. You work well with other colleagues, you engage in friendly conversation with the rest of the crew, you even participate in James Park's inexplicable movie nights where humans gather to criticize fictional narratives while consuming excessive amounts of popcorn. Those movie nights are a cultural institution, Elena protested. And the popcorn consumption is perfectly reasonable. Last Tuesday, you ate approximately 4 servings while explaining to everyone why the spaceship in Galactic Warrior 7 could not possibly achieve faster-than-light travel using the propulsion system shown on screen. Lyraliai's eyes gleamed with what might have been amusement. Your critique was both detailed and passionate. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks. The physics were completely wrong. They were using quantum tunneling principles but ignoring relativistic effects entirely. It was painful to watch. Yes, I observed your physical distress during the more scientifically inaccurate scenes. You made several interesting facial expressions that I have not catalogued in other human emotional responses. Lyraliai leaned closer, and Elena caught a hint of her scent, something like ozone and flowers that didn't exist on Earth. You are clearly capable of relaxed social interaction. Yet with me, you become what James Park describes as jumpy as a caffeinated squirrel. He said that. Elena's voice cracked slightly. His exact words. I researched both caffeine effects and squirrel behavior to understand the comparison. The correlation was quite illuminating. Elena dissolved into laughter despite herself, the absurd image of Lyraliai conducting serious research into hyperactive rodents too ridiculous to resist. You actually looked up caffeinated squirrels? Extensively. I also consulted several databases on human anxiety responses and social avoidance patterns. Lyraliai's ears twitched with what Elena was learning to recognize as pleased satisfaction. My conclusion is that your behavior indicates either intense dislike or... She paused, her expression growing uncertain. Or something else entirely. The laughter died in Elena's throat. Something else? Human emotional responses are significantly more complex than Etherian patterns. We experience attraction, affection, and romantic interest in relatively straightforward ways. But humans seem to develop feelings that cause them distress, that make them behave irrationally, that create internal conflict between desire and social propriety. Elena's coffee cup clattered against the table as her hands started shaking. Lyraliai. I have been wondering, Lyraliai continued, her voice growing softer, if your avoidance might indicate the presence of such conflicted emotions. If perhaps your discomfort stems not from dislike, but from feelings you consider inappropriate or impossible. The observation deck seemed to shrink around them, the vast cosmos outside suddenly feeling intimate and claustrophobic. Elena stared at Lyraliai's face, at those expressive ears that revealed every nuance of emotion, at amber eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed defenses. That's quite a theory, Elena managed. Is it accurate? Lyraliai's ears were trembling slightly, betraying her own nervousness despite her calm voice. Elena opened her mouth to deny it, to deflect with another joke or scientific tangent, to maintain the safe distance she'd worked so hard to preserve. Instead, she found herself looking into those alien eyes and realizing that she was tired of running. Tired of maintenance tunnel routes and supply closet hiding places and pretending she didn't notice every time Lyraliai entered a room. What if it were, she asked quietly. What if a human did develop complicated feelings about an Etherian colleague? Hypothetically speaking. Lyraliai's ears shot straight up, then drooped forward in what Elena had learned was confusion. Hypothetically, such a situation would be unprecedented in the records of both species. There are no established protocols for interspecies emotional attachment. No protocols, Elena repeated. Right. Because that would be weird. And inappropriate. And probably against several different regulations. Undoubtedly, Lyraliai agreed, though her voice held an odd note. It would also be impossible? Elena suggested when Lyraliai trailed off. I was going to say fascinating, Lyraliai said softly. From a xenobiological perspective, the development of cross-species attraction would suggest remarkable evolutionary adaptability. The ability to form emotional bonds beyond the boundaries of genetic compatibility implies a level of cognitive flexibility that. She stopped, her ears flushing with what looked like embarrassment. I apologize. I am approaching this as a research problem rather than a personal situation. Personal situation. Elena's heart rate spiked. Lyralii met her eyes directly, and Elena saw something there that made breathing difficult. The theoretical human in your hypothetical scenario would not be alone in experiencing such feelings. The words hung between them like a bridge neither of them was quite ready to cross. Outside the viewport, the binary stars continued their eternal dance, painting the nebula in shades of possibility. Elena stared at Lyralii across the observation deck, her brain struggling to process what she'd just heard. The theoretical human in your hypothetical scenario would not be alone in experiencing such feelings. The words seemed to echo in the space between them, growing more impossible with each repetition. You're saying. Elena's voice came out as barely a whisper. You're saying that you. I am saying that for the past 6 months, I have been conducting what I believe to be cultural research, only to discover that my interest in human behavior was significantly more focused than proper scientific methodology would dictate. Lyralii's ears were doing something complicated that Elena had never seen before, twitching between positions as if they couldn't decide whether to show embarrassment or determination. Specifically focused on one particular human's behavior. Elena's synthetic coffee had gone completely cold, but she clutched the cup anyway, needing something solid to anchor herself. That's not possible. I mean, we're different species. We probably can't even. She gestured vaguely, heat flooding her cheeks. Biologically speaking, there are compatibility issues to consider. Compatibility for what, exactly? Lyralii's head tilted in that curious way that Elena had come to find both endearing and dangerous to her emotional equilibrium. For, you know. Elena waved her hands more frantically. Reproductive, relationship, things. Lyralii's ears perked up with what was definitely amusement now. Elena, are you under the impression that romantic attachment requires reproductive compatibility? Because if so, I fear your education in human sexuality may have been remarkably narrow. Elena opened and closed her mouth several times, probably resembling one of the ornamental fish in the hydroponics lab. That's not. I mean. According to my research into human romantic customs, your species forms emotional and physical bonds based on a complex variety of factors including intellectual compatibility, shared interests, emotional resonance, and physical attraction. Reproductive capability, while sometimes relevant, is not a prerequisite. Lyralii leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a teasing tone. Unless you are suggesting that human same-gender couples are somehow invalid? Of course not. Elena protested. It's just, we're not even the same genus, let alone species. There are no precedents for this kind of relationship. No social frameworks, no legal protections, no idea how either of our governments would react to. She stopped, realizing she was essentially arguing against something she desperately wanted while simultaneously admitting she wanted it. Elena, Lyralii said gently, are you trying to convince me that interspecies attraction is impossible, or are you trying to convince yourself? Elena buried her face in her hands, her carefully constructed defenses finally crumbling completely. I don't know. This is exactly why I've been avoiding you. Because every time we talk, I end up more confused and more. She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. More what? More interested in finding out what would happen if I stopped running away from you, Elena admitted in a voice so quiet that Lyralii had to lean closer to hear her. The silence that followed stretched between them like a held breath. Elena could hear the soft hum of the station's life support systems, the distant murmur of voices from other sections, the almost inaudible vibration of the quantum generators that had nearly killed them both 3 days ago. Finally, Lyralii spoke. What would happen, hypothetically, if you stopped running. Elena looked up, meeting those amber eyes that had haunted her dreams for months. Hypothetically, I'd probably do something completely inappropriate like tell you that I find your ears absolutely fascinating. And that your laugh is the best sound in the universe. And that I've been memorizing your schedule just as much as you've been memorizing mine because I wanted to know where you'd be even if I was too much of a coward to actually seek you out. Lyreliai's ears shot straight up, then drooped forward in what Elena was learning might be pleased surprise. That would indeed be inappropriate by most professional standards. Completely inappropriate, Elena agreed, her heart hammering against her ribs. It would also be remarkably similar to what I might say if I were being equally inappropriate. Lyreliai's voice had dropped to something soft and warm. About finding human expressiveness captivating, and about the way you gesture when you're explaining complex scientific concepts, and about how I have been hoping for months that you might eventually stop fleeing every time I entered a room. Elena laughed, a sound somewhere between hysteria and relief. So we're both completely inappropriate. Apparently so. Lyreliai smiled, the expression transforming her face in ways that made Elena's breath catch. The question becomes, what do two inappropriate individuals do with such a situation? Before Elena could lose her nerve, she reached across the small table between them and took Lyreliai's hand. The alien woman's skin was warm and surprisingly soft, her fingers longer than Elena's but fitting perfectly against her palm. I have absolutely no idea, Elena said honestly. I've never been attracted to someone from another planet before. I don't know the rules, or the protocols, or even if there are rules and protocols. I don't know how our respective species will react, or what it means for our careers, or whether we're about to cause the first interspecies diplomatic incident in recorded history. Lyreliai's fingers tightened around Elena's. Those are significant concerns. They are. Elena took a shaky breath. But I also don't care anymore. Because I'm tired of hiding in supply closets and taking the long way to avoid you and pretending I don't notice every time you walk into a room. I'm tired of running from the most interesting person I've ever met just because she happens to have better hearing and more aesthetically pleasing ears than the average human. Aesthetically pleasing? Lyreliai's ears perked up with obvious delight. Gorgeous, Elena corrected, her face burning with embarrassment and honesty. Your ears are gorgeous. Along with the rest of you. Which is probably not something I should say to a colleague, but I'm apparently past caring about appropriate professional boundaries. Lyreliai was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing patterns across Elena's knuckles that made thinking difficult. Elena, there is something I must tell you. About Etherian culture, and about why your confession is so significant. Elena's stomach dropped. Oh no. What did I just culturally violate? Nothing negative, Lyreliai said quickly, her ears flicking up in reassurance. But among my people, emotional attachments are different than human experiences. We do not form romantic bonds with individuals outside our own species. It is not forbidden, exactly, but it is unprecedented. Unknown. There are no words in our language for what I have been feeling, no social structures to support it, no framework for understanding it. Elena's heart sank. So this is impossible after all. No, Lyreliai said firmly, her grip tightening on Elena's hand. It means this is revolutionary. You and I, if we choose to pursue this attachment, would be creating something entirely new. Not just for ourselves, but potentially for both our species. Elena stared at their joined hands, human and Etherian fingers intertwined. No pressure there. Indeed. Lyreliai's voice held gentle humor. Though I should mention that the absence of precedent also means there are no established rules against it. We would be making our own protocols. Our own protocols, Elena repeated thoughtfully. I like the sound of that. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the nebula swirl outside the massive viewport. Elena found herself studying Lyreliai's profile, memorizing the elegant curve of her ears, the way starlight caught in her amber eyes. So what happens now? Elena asked eventually. Now, I believe, we stop avoiding each other and start figuring out how to navigate uncharted territory together. Lyralii turned to meet Elena's gaze. Perhaps we could begin with a proper collaborative research project. I have been developing some theories about quantum resonance patterns in nebular formations that could benefit from a human perspective. Elena grinned, feeling lighter than she had in months. Dr. Lyralii, are you asking me on a science date? Dr. Vasquez, I am asking you to help me write the first chapter of interspecies cooperation. Lyralii's ears twitched with mischief. The science date is merely a pleasant bonus. Elena laughed, the sound echoing off the observation deck's curved walls. In that case, I accept. But I have one condition. Which is? No more hiding in supply closets. If we're going to be revolutionary, we might as well do it with dignity. Agreed, Lyralii said solemnly, then spoiled the effect by adding, though I make no promises about the dignity aspect. James Park has informed me that human courtship rituals often involve considerable amounts of what he calls, adorable awkwardness. Elena groaned. Please tell me you haven't been consulting James about human dating customs. Only extensively, Lyralii admitted, her ears drooping with embarrassment. His advice was, comprehensive. And frequently incomprehensible. Did you know that humans sometimes express romantic interest by sharing food items called pizza, while criticizing fictional entertainment? Movie night, Elena realized with dawning horror. He told you about movie night dates. He was very enthusiastic about the cultural significance of pizza and a movie. I have been attempting to understand the connection between Italian cuisine and romantic compatibility for weeks. Elena dissolved into helpless laughter, pulling her hand free to cover her face. Oh God! You've been taking dating advice from the man who once tried to flirt with someone by explaining the thermodynamic properties of different coffee brewing methods. That explains some of the confusion in his guidance, Lyralii said thoughtfully. Though I confess, I find the concept of sharing meals while engaging in collaborative criticism quite appealing. Elena looked up at her, this brilliant, beautiful alien woman who had been researching pizza as a love language, and felt something settle into place in her chest. Something that felt like coming home after a long journey through uncharted space. Lyralii? Yes. Would you like to go get some terrible synthetic coffee and criticize the quantum physics in really bad movies with me? Lyralii's smile was radiant. Elena Vasquez, I thought you would never ask. As they stood to leave the observation deck together, Elena realized she was no longer afraid of unexpected encounters in station corridors. She was no longer planning escape routes or volunteer assignments to distant sensor arrays. She was planning their first official date, and wondering if the universe was ready for what they were about to create together. Outside the viewport, the binary stars continued their eternal dance, painting the nebula in shades of infinite possibility.